Today on Ask Terra Caribbean, we have Keeshan Ramkissoon, a civil engineer with Beston Consulting. We're now deep into the rainy season and we're going to be discussing flood prevention, drainage, and protecting your property in these challenging times. Keeshan, welcome and great to have you as part of our video series, Ask Terra Caribbean.
Thanks for having me.
So Keeshan Ramkissoon is a civil engineer with Beston Consulting Limited. And in this industry, we have so many questions about civil works. Here we are in the rainy season and we get loads of questions about flooding and whatnot. So it's an honor to have you here. We'll talk through a lot of that, but maybe before we get there, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your career pathway, how you got into civil engineering, and a bit about Beston.
Right, so Beston Consulting Limited is a civil structural engineering consultancy. We've been around for 30 years and we're head office in Trinidad and Tobago, but we have sub-offices in Barbados, Belize, Guyana, Grenada, and St. Lucia. Some of the projects we've worked on in the recent past are the CRH UBH interchange, the Furnace car park, and we've project managed the Point Fortin Hospital and currently doing the Sandy Granny Hospital. Currently we're building the San Fernando car park as well as the Port of Spain General Hospital Central Block. Some civil works we've done as well are about 100 bridges throughout the country and a lot of upgrades to feeder roads. We've also designed we've done the preliminary designs for the new McCoy interchange and Trinity interchange, as well as we've done a lot of land development throughout the country. For me specifically, I've worked on the Invaders Bay development, which is right behind Movie Town, 24 hectares. It's going to be an industrial, commercial space for hotels and marinas and business offices. So something you may be interested in.
Absolutely.
And then like Rincon Estate, which is a housing estate, it's 193 hectares in Las Cuevas. It's an upgrade of existing development, but it's going to have a lot of land for sale. And then we've done industrial parks like Labre Industrial Estate, as well as some industrial parks with National Energy in Central. We've also done minor housing developments, like right now the St. George's development, which was formerly Hebron Heights, that is being completed. And also a few other bridge projects and roads to housing developments throughout the country.
Very impressive portfolio, man. Some significant projects. That's really something, you know?
Yeah.
In fact, I was down in Port of Spain just the other day watching that North Block rise up out of the ground. It's a substantial. How many stories is that?
I think it's about 14 stories.
14 stories and all part of the new hospital.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah, so being in the real estate industry, we get loads of questions. That relate to infrastructure, roads, as you see we've spoken to in the past. And of course, being in the rainy season now, we get a lot of questions about flooding and does the area flood? And I guess it's not an easy question to answer, but I thought I would kind of throw that at you. Somebody looking to buy a property, what are the first kind of signs they should look for?
Right. So that's a very good question and very apt nowadays. So there's two types of flooding basically. So I'll just go into the little background. So you have the flash flooding and then you have like riverine flooding. So flash flooding will take place right after a heavy downpour and it will last for a couple of minutes, maybe an hour tops or so. Then you have riverine flooding, which is where you have a more widespread flooding where rivers actually overtop this bank. So flash flooding, you would most likely get it on the foothills of the mountains or any valleys and so. You may get it on the flat areas as well. It will disappear after a short time. It is quite destructive, especially on the hills where it has the fast moving water and actually damage roads and your property and so. And then you have areas where it's susceptible to the riverine flooding, like central and southern areas where flooding can last for days at a time. So one of the main indicators of if you're looking to buy a new piece of land or to do for a new development, one of the basic things you could find out and ask the agent as well. Find out from the neighbors exactly, has this area ever been impacted by flooding, whether flash or riverine flooding. Your neighbors, trust me, people love to talk about flooding. You could always get history. Some, especially the older folks, ask them, they will tell you 30 years ago this area flooded and it went up, the flood water was up to this mango tree level or this hole on this. They will give you indicators. And in fact, that is one of the things we look at as civil engineers, because sometimes when we're doing river modeling and we're trying to predict flows in the river, we have to verify our models. And sometimes we don't have the accurate data from WASO so to verify our elevations in terms of the flood levels. So we actually go out and talk to the people around the area and ask them, has this area ever flooded? What level has the water come up to? And they might say it came up to this level on the wall, and you can actually see a water stain on the wall. And we've actually surveyed that point and actually got the elevation of that point and then verified it in our flood model. So if we could do it, you can do it too, to find out about the history of the area.
Yeah, very good. I wouldn't suggest you ask the agent, but ask the neighbors, or ask the agent to ask the neighbors, because the agents don't live in the area, and but the neighbors certainly do. And as you say, the older folk, you know. But what concerns me, and I guess everybody else, maybe I speak for most others, is how rapidly this is changing, how quickly, you know, the levels are rising. And I mean, look at areas like Caroni and Riverine flooding in particular, and you kind of ask yourself, how do you prevent, or how do you safeguard your property? Or when you go in to look at a development to buy a piece of land, how do you pacify your concerns, you know, having visited the property?
Right, so there are a couple of things you could do. So firstly, you have to look at the overall picture and then your piece of land itself. So for your personal property, if you're building from new, again, you want to ask your neighbors, what is the flood levels? And then you, if it's possible, you fill up your land to above the flood level. Or if it's not possible, if it's too costly or so, you actually set your first floor higher than the flood level. So you actually put it on small columns or so and have a crawl space on the house, something like that. So that the main floor of your house is not impacted by flooding. In fact, I have a family member who bought land in Las Lomas in 2016. And for the 2018 flood, they were not impacted at all, thankfully. I think the water level came up to like 1 inch below their floor level. Wow. That was because they filled up about 8 feet from the existing ground to the new level of their ground floor. So something like that you could do. Otherwise, if you're building or if you're buying an existing development, you could retrofit your area and retrofit your buildings so with flood-proof doors and so, or just have sandbags ready in case it floods. In terms of the holistic picture, the big picture, there are areas that flood. We can't get away from that in particular. What you have to do though is, if the area floods and you think you might be susceptible to flooding, insurance might be a good bet. That's these kind of soft measures we have. So there are soft and hard measures to protect from flooding, so insurance is a good soft measure. Also, you have to consider the access to your house. If an area floods, will you be able to access your house? So you might have to invest in a higher vehicle. So if sometimes the water might just be about 6 inches, a couple inches. I mean, it's not good to drive through flood water, but if it's an emergency, you have to consider these things as well.
Yeah, I think these are all very good suggestions. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying, you know, you need to, as a buyer buying a single lot of land or property, you need to raise your property as high as you can, right? Floods, basically above the neighboring properties, because to retrofit the existing infrastructure in the community is just an overwhelming task. As well as if you're buying into a development, you want to ensure that that development has been backfilled, maybe has berms, you know, and is protected against water getting onto the site. So water that falls on the site can be taken off the site, but you don't want water to flow directly onto the site. As well as access is huge. So I live in Maraval, and I think my next vehicle needs to be higher off the ground, because while my property may not flood, I need to get in and out of there.
So Savile Road floods, by Royal Palm, that area, that floods tremendously, and by La Saiva as well. But back to your point on the land developments, the new developments that are being approved and being built now, I know Drainage Vision has been looking at new developments stringently. And I've gone through this process a couple of times in the past couple of years. The requirements for getting Drainage Division's approval is pretty strict, and I'm certain that the work that Drainage Vision is doing now, they are actually upgrading themselves to basically prevent flooding from new developments. So new developments who's gone through the process, I'm pretty sure they'll be okay to prevent flooding. The existing developments, yes, some sort of retrofitting will have to be done if it does flood, like how Greenvale flooded out in 2018, and then there was a whole upgrade works, the pumps and detention pond for it. So flooding on a wide scale picture, there are things the government is doing. Some things are not fast enough. They can't do everything they would like to do. So we just have to be cognizant of that fact. I mean, they will never solve, flooding will never be solved in the Caribbean Basin or in Sandy Grande or so. So you just have to be aware of that fact, and you have to plan for it basically. One of the soft measures of dealing with flooding is actually accepting that the area will flood and being able to build back from it. So it's actually a term we call resiliency in flood design or flood proofing.
Yes, Keeshan, those are really strong points. And, you know, we've seen it where the drainage division has really stepped up now, having witnessed the issues that we're facing. And they're definitely more stringent in requirements, and rightfully so.
Yes.
So we've seen it with new developments where they are asking for additional box drains, additional capacity, additional requirements as it relates to keeping water off the site and dispersing the stormwater that may fall onto the site. So I'm confident that, you know, should a developer get full approvals in this environment, that the development should be worthy and you know, worthy of withstanding the current elements.
Yeah.
These elements are always changing, and that's the hardest part with this whole situation. But you know, another question we get quite often, you know, we sell land sites, call it a single dwelling house land site, and land preparation cost and infrastructure is a question we get all the time, because you could find a piece of land that's $600,000, or you could find a piece of land that's $1 million. Right now, if it's $600,000, there may be a significant cost in preparing the land before you're able to build on it. So maybe you could speak a little bit to that, like what's involved in preparing sloping land for development.
Right, so in fact, I was just asked to view a land in Maracas Valley, and the land was, I think, reasonably priced, but it was steep no hell. So the actual usable bit of the land is very small, and then the amount of work you would have to do to actually build on that piece of land would be quite significant, because you're talking about lots of retaining walls, and you're talking about probably a 3-story building just so that it will be basically fit on the piece of land properly. So yes, land development costs, especially on hilly areas, is significant. So there's a number of measures you could do. So you could do retaining walls, that way you could cut and fill the land so you can get flat areas and to protect your property boundaries or property itself. So retaining walls could cost a lot. In the northern areas, mostly, you have like RC or reinforced concrete cantilever walls, which are simple walls made out of concrete and sometimes even block work. You can use depending on the heights of the wall. Those are fairly cheap to build and to design and to construct. But in areas, if you're doing, that's for regular, smaller walls, less than 3 meters or so, like a building height, a floor height. But when you're doing larger walls, higher walls, you may then have to go into piles, and so that's on the northern side. On the central side, where the soil is much different than in the northern range, where you have these what we call fat clays, and they swell when they get water. So they're very destructive in terms of land development. So that's why you have a lot of landslides down south central, because when they get wet, either from rainfall or from leaking pipelines, they tend to move. So that's why retaining walls and so fail, and buildings move a lot. In fact, building a house in central and south on the hilly portions is totally different from the northern side.
Yes, I would imagine so.
Yeah, so in central and south, rule of thumb is you actually want to put your house on pile foundation, so that's the deep long shafts connected to your columns, and so because you generally have a lot of differential settlement. That's where the new building especially, settles over time differently. So that's why, in fact, you could see it in most buildings when you have a door that's jamming or a window that's not closing properly. that's actually caused by the house settling differently. So if it's on a hill, like hills like this, and you have one foundation up here and one down here, the one down here might sink a little more fast, well, sink faster than the one on top. So you get the building tilting very slightly, but you would see the cracks and so developing. So you need to have your deep foundations generally in the southern central areas to prevent that.
Very good. I mean, that's very good advice for buyers. And you know, we always encourage people to do their due diligence when they're buying a parcel of land before they jump into it and you know, and meet these issues later on, right? So what would you need to see in order to advise somebody? Is it a topographical survey? Is it a soil test? Is it like what does somebody need to provide to be well informed to make a good decision?
So that's actually a great question, because people don't like to spend money generally on design work. They would say it's a waste of time, but and they would spend money on construction. But the money you spend on design work could actually save you tenfold later down the road, either in actual construction costs or in terms of renovations and remedial works to a building that is failing also. And we've seen it time and time again, even with large government projects. You spend money on your topographical survey, which is basically survey of the land, saying these are the elevations of the land and so. So people normally do the cadastral survey, which sets out the boundary, but the topographical survey is also important.
Correct,
and
absolutely.
Then, depending on the site, whether you need a geotechnical survey, which is the soil investigations, basically. So that will determine things like your soil types for your foundations, to determine the size of your foundations and whether you need retaining walls or pile foundations or so. So the money you could spend in you doing a proper survey, topographical and geotechnical, that could save you in the long run, again, from the differential settlement and, again, sizing your foundations. Because sometimes you go to a contractor and say you want to build a 1-story, 2-story house. They would say typical dimensions, and they might actually have sizes of elements that may be bigger than what you really need to. So you're actually spending more money in concrete and steel, where if you go by engineer or proper design, well, most likely an engineer, they would actually specify columns that are bespoke, basically, so that you have the proper size for your building. So
yeah, it's typical kind of, you know, penny wise, pound foolish. You should certainly spend the money up front to do the studies to ensure that you're building what's appropriate, because it's effectively, at the end of the day, it's a very small percentage of the entire investment. Right?
So the design work usually comes up generally about 5%, if so much, of the total cost. That's for big contracts. So like highways and major government buildings, and so the architect, the MEP engineer, which is your services engineer, your civil structural engineer, and all your topographical geotechnical surveys, they come up to about 5-10% of the actual work. And again, you have a proper design team. So if it's a small project, you might just have one engineer and one draftsman. If it's a larger development, you have a project team. But a good project team with a proper project manager during construction, they could save you tons of money.
So in our opinion, that is all money well spent, right? And especially in Trinidad and Tobago, where, as you rightfully said earlier, the topography and the type of soil changes significantly from the south to the north. So thanks again, Keeshan, for coming in, man. Really a pleasure to have you here at Ask Terra Caribbean.
It's great being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.